have joined the meeting now. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a couple of announcements and then introduce our speakers for today. Welcome again to the Environmental Engineering Graduate Seminar Series at Michigan Tech. Again, I do have a couple of announcements. A reminder that everybody will be on mute and unable to share video during the presentation. If you have questions for our speakers, we're going to try to hold those for the end. And as in the past, please just raise your hand or type a question in the chat and we'll make sure that our speakers get to that. Another reminder, if you want the documentation of your continuing education, please email Dr. Eric Seagren. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to make an announcement about the upcoming seminars. Next week, April 5th, we're going to have Bruce Rittman of Arizona State University, the Biodesign Institute there, will be speaking about microbial biotechnology, the integration of omics and mass balances. Promises to be a fascinating presentation, and I'm sure a few of you have heard of Bruce Rittman. The following week, April 12th, we'll have Professor Detlef Knappe from North Carolina State University talking about his really massive body of work on PFAS in the state of North Carolina. So just wanted to give you a little bit of advance notice of those two seminars. And of course, please encourage all of your students to attend as well. It's a great opportunity to hear from some well-known individuals in environmental engineering. But I'm also really excited about today's seminar. I always look forward to hearing from some of our own graduate students. And today we'll be hearing from Karleigh Krieg and Robyn Holmes. So just a little bit of information on Karleigh and Robyn. Karleigh is currently a MS student in the environmental engineering program at Michigan Tech. She previously obtained an associate's degree in science from Bay College in 2016 and received the BS degree in environmental engineering from Michigan Tech in May of 2019. And during the course of her graduate study, she's done a number of things. She completed the graduate certificate in sustainability, and she's been working in the biofuels and bioproducts lab in the chemical engineering department under the supervision of Dr. Rebecca Ong. And while working for Dr. Ong, she developed optimization experiments for the processing of biomass to biofuel for the Great Lakes Bioenergy Research Center. In addition to all of this, Karleigh is working with Dr. David Watkins on her master's degree research, which focuses on analyzing the impacts of agriculture and forestry products on freshwater resources in the southwestern portion of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. And in addition to all of this, Karleigh is very active outside of academia. In particular, she's a very active participant in the League of Women Voters of the Copper Country. Just a little bit about Robyn, and I'm going to have them obviously introduce their talks. Robyn also graduated with a BS degree in environmental engineering from Michigan Tech in 2019. She is now working toward her MS degree in civil engineering focused on water resources, and her research in this area is being conducted with Dr. Alex Mayer, who I see has joined us, and welcome, Alex. And Alex is, of course, now at the University of Texas at El Paso. And her master's research involves modeling a reservoir under multiple climate change scenarios. And outside of academia, Robyn has acquired additional experience in environmental monitoring and ecological restoration. After graduation, Robyn aims to work for a local or regional water management organization in a position that involves modeling or data analysis along with plenty of field work. So with that, we're going to have Karleigh present first, and then Robyn. And again, if you would, if possible, hold your questions or just type them in the chat. We'll get to you at the end of the presentation. So when you're ready, Karleigh, please feel free to start.
All right, so my master's research is dedicated to understanding the connection between food and water using the water footprint method.
Excuse me, Karleigh, I just wanted to inquire if you want to share your video while you're speaking. You don't have to, but I just wanted to ask now.
Yeah, no, I don't have a webcam on my desktop.
Okay.
So yeah. Thank you, though. All right. So today I'll go over what a water footprint is, how it is calculated, and its limitations. I will discuss the purpose of my study, the area I'm investigating, and sharing with you my methodology. Introduced in 2002, the water footprint is an indicator of the freshwater use of a consumer or a product. It is geographically explicit as well, showing not only how much water is used, but where it is being used. Usually, this measurement has been applied to agriculture and forestry, since these are very water-intensive sectors of industry. The table here shows agriculture's impact on the global water budget by listing the top 10 most water-intensive products produced worldwide. In addition, it is a versatile measurement of freshwater resources consumed. By this, I mean we can calculate the water footprint of a product, of a consumer, of a delineated area, a nation, an industry, and so on. Related to my work, I'll be considering a combination of these applications. Specifically, I am looking at the process of growing agricultural products in a watershed over a 20-year period. To calculate the water footprint of growing plants, I need to consider 3 sub-water footprints: the green, blue, and gray water footprints. The green is the volume of water that comes from precipitation, stored in the soil, and finally used by plants. The blue is the volume of water sourced from ground and surface water for irrigation purposes. Finally, the gray is the water needed to reduce pollutants to concentrations that meet local water quality standards. The equations for these are listed here. The blue and green water footprints require the summation of evapotranspiration terms specific to blue and green water uses. The gray, on the other hand, requires the equation listed at the bottom. It includes the leaching runoff fraction, alpha, the application rate of a chemical with pollutants in it, AR, and the concentrations allowed, Cmax, and concentration in the natural environment, Cnat, of a pollutant or chemical applied. For each of these terms, you will notice the variable Y, which represents the crop yield in tons of crop harvested per acre planted. Despite its usefulness, the water footprint assessment method has some important limitations. First, as a generic tool, it does not consider water availability and the effects of water consumption on beneficial uses such as ecosystems management. However, it does consider the impacts that activities have on the quantity and quality of fresh water. Second, the method can be data intensive, making it difficult to find practical examples of assessments conducted with limited data. Thus, this study seeks to improve the water footprint assessment for agriculture by considering the geographic and hydrologic context of water use within a local watershed. I'll also be outlining a methodology for dealing with data limitations. And finally, I'll be comparing my findings to that of natural or low-impact land uses to find a baseline for comparison between the water use of agriculture and that of natural landscapes. To accomplish this, I need to find a watershed that meets the criteria of growing corn and soybeans. Thus, it must produce these 2 crops. I need to find the data required to calculate the ET terms in the blue and green footprint and the variables required for the gray water footprint equation. Lastly, I will need to conduct a water footprint analysis for the low-impact natural landscapes, such as forested area or a prairie. The watershed I found to fit my criteria is the St. Joseph watershed, located in the southwestern portion of the Lower Peninsula. It does have some interesting management problems. Since it spans 2 states, with 8 counties in Michigan and 7 in Indiana, there has been little effort made to coordinate the management practices of it, making my study integral for potential policy decisions. As mentioned, the area needs to be dominated by agriculture. You can see from the pie chart on the left that over a 20-year period, the St. Joseph watershed has had an average of 53% of the land dedicated to crops. The pie chart on the right shows that of this cropland, 42% is allocated to growing corn and 33% is for growing soybeans. Since the St. Joseph watershed covers 15 counties, the example of my methodology I'll be sharing today will be for Berrien County, Michigan, shown within the black box. We'll say that corn for grain is being produced during the 2006 growing season and that there is phosphorus pollution occurring within the county. To calculate the blue and green water footprints, I have decided to employ Cropwat. Developed by the FAO, Cropwat calculates the crop water requirements as well as irrigation requirements needed to have successful crop development. To run this program, I need to input 3 categories of data: climate data, crop characteristics, and soil conditions. Here is a screenshot of the temperature, humidity, wind speed, and hours of sun. Because the climate data was not always complete, I had to look into multiple sources of data. The 2 that provided the most complete coverage was the NOAA Local Climatological Dataset, LCD, and Iowa State University's Weather Network, called AWOS or ASOS. Here is the screenshot for the rainfall module, which is the second part of the climate data requirements. Of importance here is the effective rain, which is the amount of rainfall available for crops to use, accounting for losses due to runoff and deep percolation. Crop characteristics need to be inputted into the program as well. Planting dates were found from the USDA's Typical Planting and Harvest Date publication from 2010. What's nice about Cropwat is that it has a pool of crops that can be selected. So upon a selection, these cells will be filled. The last module is the soil information. In the St. Joseph watershed, the dominant category is sandy soil. Though there is a mixture of soil types across the watershed, as shown in the ArcGIS shapefile on the right, there is only one type of soil that can be used per simulation. Similar to the crop characteristics module, Cropwat has pre-made selections. Thus, for this example, I chose the light sandy soil file. Finally, we get to the crop water requirements, which shows the blue and green evapotranspiration terms or water use terms. You will notice that the blue ET is called potential water use. This is because this value represents the amount of irrigation required to complement the green ET in order to ensure successful development of crops. This does not represent the actual irrigation data for Berrien County. Thus, a comparison between what water is needed for irrigation and what is actually applied may be necessary moving forward. The gray water footprint requires a different approach. Instead of using a program, I need to rely on the Water Footprint Assessment Manual. As mentioned before, I need 4 values: the leaching fraction, the chemical application rate, and 2 concentrations for the pollutant of interest. From a global average perspective, the leaching runoff fractions are listed here. These are not specific to the St. Joseph watershed, but instead provide a starting point for my analysis. The application rates are not readily available either. Thus, I am relying on the USDA Ag Census, shown on the right, and the Quick Stats function, shown on the left, to provide me this data. Using the EPA's regulations for pollutants in drinking water, I have compiled a general overview of these values that will be used for CMAX. As stated in the Water Footprint Manual, the natural concentrations of pollutants, CNAT, might be difficult to find. Applying this to the St. Joseph watershed, it might even be hard to find agreement between Michigan and Indiana counties that the watershed spans. In addition, given the large size of the watershed, the natural concentration of pollutants might vary depending on the location. Therefore, it is recommended that the natural concentration of any pollutant be considered 0. So this table shows the values that I used in my calculation. Again, the leaching runoff fraction is specific to phosphorus, since in this example, we're considering there's phosphorus pollution. So with all the sub-footprints calculated out, the total water footprint is shown here. We can see that the gray water footprint has the greatest weight on the total water footprint. Berrien County doesn't experience water scarcity, so the majority of water consumed is needed to ensure compliance with local water quality standards. Moving forward, I have some aspects of my research left to do. Though useful, Cropwat is kind of clunky, since the cells on each module need to be inputted manually, and this becomes quite frustrating with the climate data. So I'll need to finish all of the simulations in order to get the green and blue water footprints for the St. Joseph watershed. The leaching runoff fractions, again, they're based off of a global average. So to make my study more defined, I will need to find those that are specific to the St. Joseph watershed, or at least something from the Great Lakes area. In addition, the application rates are difficult to come by, and the value I use to calculate the gray water footprint is the average application rate for the entire U.S. Thus, I need to consult the USDA Ag Census database for rates specific to each county within the watershed, or to Michigan and Indiana, or at least one to the Great Lakes region. Finally, I need to calculate the water footprints of the natural land uses. For this, a program of interest is HAWKS, which stands for Hydrologic and Water Quality System. It can simulate the effects of management practices based on different land uses within a watershed and may help to guide my comparison analysis. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Karleigh. That was wonderful. Robyn, if you're ready to go, Karleigh will have you stop sharing, and then Robyn, you can start a new share. And then I again ask that if possible, people hold their questions for Karleigh, but if it's helpful, you can type them into the chat, or it might be helpful for Karleigh and she can consider them. And we'll give both Karleigh and Robyn a chance to respond to questions at the end. All right, Robyn Holmes.
I have to rename my. Okay, that should be good. Okay. Thanks for coming and taking time to come to my seminar. So my research looks at water availability in the Middle Rio Grande under a changing climate. And if you watched my World Water Day 3-minute thesis last week, you might recognize this image and be ready to leave because you've already heard about my research. But hopefully that had the opposite effect and got you curious to learn more, because there's a lot more interesting stuff I had to leave out in 3 minutes, and I'm excited to share more with you today. So some background, this is the Rio Grande. And this photo was taken just a bit south of my study area near Las Cruces, New Mexico. And you might have some familiarity with the Rio Grande and where it is, but I'm guessing not many people know where the Elephant Butte Reservoir is. So we're going to go on a virtual tour here and see where in the world we are. And so the Rio Grande starts in southern Colorado in a mountainous region, flows through all of New Mexico, and then forms the border between Texas and Mexico. and it's actually the second longest river in the continental US after the Missouri, Mississippi. And at this level of viewing, you can just barely make out the subwatersheds that make up my study area in the southern New Mexico area. So zooming in a bit, now we're at a level where I can start talking about the regional hydrology. And one thing you can see just from looking at the aerial is that it's pretty dry here. They don't really call it the desert Southwest for nothing. My study area averages around 9 inches of rain per year, and that's compared to 33 here in Houghton. But where we do see some green patches is up in this mountainous region. Let me get it so you can see my pointer. And so there's the orographic lifting, and so they get more precipitation. And most of the water down in my study area actually originates from snowpack up in the mountains, and the flow from the snowmelt is concentrated in April and May. And so in order to have more control over when the water flows and how much is flowing, as humans like to do, they put some dams on the river. Oh wait, there's snow. And so these are the dams that I model and simulate the flows in my research. And so the Elephant Butte Dam on top, that one is the main storage for the area, and it has a capacity of around 2 million acre feet, whereas the Caballo Dam on the bottom is used more to fine tune the volume and timing of the releases to water users. And who are the users? For starts, there's farming. You can't really see it because it's so close to the river valley on the big aerial, but here zoomed in, you can see that there's farming following the river, and that's one of the main water users. But then there's also 3 major cities along with some smaller cities. So the main ones are Las Cruces, Juarez, and El Paso, and that's where Alex is. And I guess it's important to put in context that there's a lot of users and not a lot of water, and the water rights that determine how much water everyone in the area gets were created during a wetter period in history. And so even in a good time in recent history, there's not quite enough water to go around. And so then in bad times, it's just even worse. So now we're looking at some aerial images of the Elephant Butte Reservoir, which is the larger one I was talking about on the last slide. And so this is on the left is in June of 1994, and then on the right is in July of 2013. And that was during a very major period of drought, the worst one in recent history. And you can see there's just not much water in the reservoir, and farms and cities during this drought didn't get as much water as they'd want, or anywhere close to what they usually get. And they had to rely more on groundwater, which is also a limited resource. So the concern is that going into the future with climate change, will there be a similar amount of water, or will climate change cause a decrease or possibly increase in the amount of water available? And will this really low water period be a more normal thing? We don't know, it's the future, but that's what my research is trying to answer. So the questions my research asks is, how might water availability be affected by climate change? And then we also look at whether the water availability is more affected by headwater climate change or local climate change. So the snowmelt and snowpack in the mountains, or local evaporation and precipitation. So methods, but first, this is the Elephant Butte of Elephant Butte. And you can see how when it was taken, it was a lower water time. But okay, here's an overview of my methods. And I guess before going further, I did want to clarify that I'll say data. And since we're going into the future, there isn't any measurements or observed data in the future. And so it's all output of models, and I'll say data, but mean model output. There's not a great word that means model output other than model output, but sometimes, I don't know, data just makes more sense to say. So this green part is the part of this flow chart that has things that I worked on. And then there's also stuff where I build off other people's work, but I include it in this flow chart because it makes my stuff make more sense knowing where it came from. So this is where we're going to start, which is the global climate projections. And so we need the temperature and precipitation inputs to run our reservoir model. And since we want to project out into the future, we need to use output from other models, as I was saying. And so these inputs to our models came from the IPCC CMIP-5 models, which stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Coupled Modeling Intercomparison Project, 5th generation. And so the IPCC basically standardizes some of the aspects of modeling, so you can look at a whole ensemble of models put out by different research institutes and be able to compare the results because they're using a similar, like the same grid size and the same initial conditions and different stuff as they go. And so there's still some differences between the models and how they parameterize different natural processes, but the fact that they're set up the same is very useful for stuff like this. And I threw all the names up there of the models simulations that we used, not because the names are important, just to show that there's a lot of them. We use 97 different simulations in our modeling project, and the data that we used didn't come straight from the global climate projections. As you can see on this image, the squares coming out of the global climate projection models are pretty big. You could probably fit about 3 or 4 of them in the whole state of New Mexico, but we're working in a smaller area, so we want a finer grid. Also, the global models often have a regional bias. So they're pretty good as a whole for the globe, but in certain areas, they might bias high or low for precipitation. And so before we use the data in any hydrological modeling or projections, it needs to go through a process to correct that. And so the data we used underwent the bias correction spatial disaggregation, BCSD process. It's one of multiple ways to do it, but this is one that had data for the area we're looking at in a place we could download it from easily. And so now we're at a much finer grid, and the data has been normalized to a historic period to remove any regional bias. And it's ready to be used as input to hydrologic models. So we've reached here, and I'm going to briefly go over the stuff on the top, even though I didn't work on it, just because it's important as input to the model. So the BCSD climate projections were used to get stream flows. The Bureau of Reclamation used the variable infiltration capacity model to get naturalized stream flows, and then someone at Nolan Townsend at University of New Mexico was a graduate student who applied a normalization procedure to account for human influence. And and those were used as input to the reservoir model. And then getting into stuff I worked on is the BCSD climate projections came in a grid, kind of a raster format. And to get values to feed into the model, we wanted an average. So I used a script written in ArcPython to spatially average these values and get yearly average temperature and precipitation to go into the model, which took a long time because that was a lot of calculations for the computer. But we've reached the model. So the model itself is that I used was quite simple. It uses a differential equation to account for changes in storage each time step. And the parts of the water balance that we accounted for are the flow into the reservoir, precipitation and evaporation from the reservoir surface, runoff, and releases. And some of these are pretty easy to calculate directly from the inputs using the surface area. Evaporation was a little bit weird because usually there's a lot of variables going into it, but we didn't have a lot of variables available from the climate data source, modeling source. And so we had to use what we had. So it's based off an empirical equation based off some other modeling of evaporation that the Bureau of Reclamation did. And so basically we did a regression of modeled evaporation and temperature. And the modeled evaporation was done using a more in-depth equation. It was a CRLE method. And then we took the relationship of that to estimate the evaporation in our model. Probably just get into more interesting stuff. I did model validation. I was only able to validate the model over 12 years because the operating rules for how much water the reservoir releases changed in 2008. But for the 12 years that we did have, it did a pretty good job. There are some small discrepancies, but considering that we aren't thinking about farmers choosing to store water between years and some different like more social factors, it did a pretty good job. And for what we were wanting to do, looking into the future on more of a broad scale, the simplicity and results work out. Okay, time for results. So the first result that I have here is actually just the inputs to our model that came from processing the spatial temperature, precipitation, stream flow data. And so you can see that it goes precipitation, temperature, stream flow, and the stream flow and the precipitation, the average is actually pretty similar going into the future. The blue is the past 50 years and the orange is the next 50 years. But then the temperature is significantly higher in the future. But for all of them, there's a lot more variability in the future. And part of that comes from the past. They were kind of forced to fit an average for some period of time before they diverge. And part of it is different model parameterization, and some of it is, oh, there's something else. I don't remember. It's not extremely important to the results. But basically the temperature is going to be higher, while the stream flow and precipitation could go either way, but will be slightly lower. across all models. So then this, I'd say, is my main result, that there will be a decline in future ability to meet the goal release volume. And so on this graph, the x-axis shows time as we go into the future, and then the y-axis shows the percent of simulations that are able to release a given volume. And you can think about that as a probability. And so then the blue line is the goal release volume, which is called full allocation of water rights. And so that decreases going to the future. And then this is like the percent of models able to release half, and 20%. And 20% represents a severe drought on the level of the 2013, and then the 50% is a more moderate drought. And so going into the future, there are more years of moderate drought and less years where the full water rights are fulfilled. And then a little aside, if you saw my 3-minute thesis, this is the graph that I used in my 3-minute thesis. And a few things I didn't have time to mention there are the fish is the Rio Grande silvery minnow, which is a species that is endangered, I guess, mostly due to human influences on the river. And there's a whole bunch of things that my modeling doesn't go into because I just focus on quantity of water, but then there's ecological and social things that are also important when looking at solutions in the big picture of water availability. And then the other thing I want to say is the style of art is inspired by the artist and climate scientist glaciologist Jill Pelto, and I recommend you check out her work if you haven't seen it. And now back to science and results. So this is the same data as my previous graph, except sliced a different way. So the last graph looked at the release volume over time. And then this slices it by which model simulation we're looking at. And basically, it shows that there's a lot of variability based on which model you look at. And thinking about what this means for water managers is that there's a lot of uncertainty. Overall, there's a projected decrease in water availability by 2.5%, but depending on which model you look at, and we don't really know like which one will be most accurate, there's a lot of variability, and so you need to have robust water management policy that will do well under a whole bunch of different scenarios that might be a lot worse than 2.5% decrease and might be a bit better. We also looked at consecutive years of drought because having one bad year is not good, but having a lot of bad years in a row is worse. And so there's, again, a lot of variation between the models, but some models project as high as 3, 4, 5 years in a row that are as bad as the like 2012, 2013 drought that I showed, the aerial of the dam at the beginning. In some years, I'd say like some of the 50% or lower full allocation for 20 years in a row or 10 years in a row would also be a different type of bad. And then finally, this gets more at the question of upstream and local influence. And my interpretation is that the upstream change in climate is a lot more influential than the local change in climate. And so this graph is a little weird, but the x-axis shows the change in local reservoir contributions between the past 50 years and the future 50 years. So positive means that there's more water locally than there was in the past on that. And then the y-axis is change in stream flow. And the interesting thing when you first look at it is there's a correlation where when there's less water upstream, there's more water locally. And so I looked into this, looking at relationships between different variables. And I found out that it's not because when it's drier upstream, there's more precipitation locally. It's actually when it's drier upstream, the reservoir volume is forced to be lower because there's less flow into the reservoir. And so then it limits the evaporation. So a positive is actually a smaller negative in evaporation. And that creates the correlation that you can see here. The other thing that's important with this plot is that the scale of local is 30 kilo acre feet per year, while the scale of stream flow is 500 kilo acre feet per year. So the amount of benefit of having a lower reservoir volume here does not make up for the fact that there is a lot less stream flow coming in. And so those are my main results. And overall, what this tells us is that the changing climate increases the uncertainty and risk in the system and limits the feasible options that water managers have. And it'll just be a more challenging environment for them to find robust and useful management strategies. For example, they'll have less water coming in, and then the reservoir could usually act as kind of a buffer for dry years if they wanted to store extra water. But with increasing evaporation, storing more water to use as a buffer then you're getting more evaporation losses. So that's a worse option. So it's kind of an optimization problem where the constraints are just pushing smaller and smaller feasible space. And then in conclusion, the future water availability decreased every way we tried slicing it. And well, there's still a lot of uncertainty. Having these future projections can help water managers find where that feasible space might be and make more robust policy going into the future, even though it'll be more challenging. And while my research deals strictly with the quantity of water, there are a lot of other issues playing into it. So this isn't the whole picture, but it's a piece of it. That's all I have. So if we want to go into question time.
Yes, are there questions for either Karleigh or Robyn? Thank you, Robyn, also for that seminar. It was really interesting. And Dr. Urban has his hand up. Let's see, you should be able to ask your question now, Dr. Urban. Thanks.
Yep. So I've had a question for both of you. Karleigh, I'm wondering if you've considered using the output from the Sparrow modeling for your runoff, was the first question. And there was actually a second question too, and that was why you chose phosphorus as the only pollutant. Is it the only pollutant of significance or not? And then for Robyn, go ahead, Karleigh.
Yeah, so Dr. Watkins and I just today talked about Sparrow, so I'm not sure about it, but we did just talk about it. And as far as the pollutant, I was just giving an example. I still don't know which pollutant I'll use in terms of the gray water footprint.
Okay. And Robyn, you're this goes beyond your work really, and concerns what the implications are. You mentioned that the decisions become harder for managers, but what's the magnitude of the water allocations relative to, and the water use relative to these impending changes?
I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but oh, well, I feel like this would answer it. There's, in the past 50 years compared to the next 50 years, my research suggests that there'd be a 2.4% decrease in the amount of water released from the dam. So I guess small, but also not small, in a place where they're already really pushed to the limits and making hard choices and like having to put in desalination plants, and I don't know. I feel.
And I guess the final question there related to that is our natural river flows, so ecosystem needs, any part of the management strategy?
I think it is a little bit. Last semester when I was doing the project for your class, looking at, where was it? It was nitrogen cycling on floodplains in on the Rio Grande, I believe, little upstream of the dam I was looking at. And it sounded like they have a seasonal flow pattern that they release partly to maintain habitat and like species, but that said they could probably do more. And I know that downstream of the El Paso area, there's an area where the river's dry most of the time before another river joins in, and there's water for the rest of the length. But like that's a spot where it could probably be a lot more like ecological diversity and just more ecological value there if there's more water for it. But there's people upstream using the water, but then they live there, and you can't just be like, don't live here anymore. So it's complex. I'm glad I'm not making decisions. I'm just looking for information.
Are there other questions for either Karleigh or Robyn?
Oh, hi, Robyn. This is Dr. Watkins. Just a question, a clarifying question. Did you only look at the water availability on an annual basis?
Yes, and that was because there's the reservoir release equation that we got from reclamation only really works at an annual basis. I think because there's so much just like people making decisions on when they want the water within the year. And that definitely is a weakness in terms of it's a large approximation for evaporation and just releases in general. And maybe if there's water at one time in the year and not another time, it's not as useful in certain times. But that was kind of the data availability we had to work with. And the future climate data is, I guess, like something you're supposed to look at a bigger picture anyways. It isn't intended to look at like this is when a drought will occur, or this is exactly what will happen.
Right. It's not predictive, but so I'm wondering, I guess I was going to ask if, if you thought about the changing seasonal patterns to flow, but that's fine if you only looked at it annually. But I'm wondering, since it seems like there's importance to the interannual carryover of storage, are you simulating, or do you expect that they would change their operating rules in terms of trigger levels and rationing water, from one year to the next in order to avoid those big shortages in the future?
We aren't looking at any alternative operating rules. That's probably something that would happen, or should happen going into the future, but it's kind of just, I guess, partly just a very big direction, new direction to go, and partly I'd say kind of hypothetical. There's just a lot of politics going into that. I don't know. It would be interesting to look more into both seasonality and operating rules if I had more time. But they're not things that I have looked at.
Okay. Yeah, you're showing the risk of the current situation. So, our current operating rules. So, okay, thank you.
We have time for maybe one more question. Alex Mayer, we haven't heard your voice in a long time. Not to put you on the spot, but.
This is Judith Carleigh, and I had a question. I'm wondering if it would be possible to apply the modeling that you're doing with Cropwat to simulate PFAS removal. So PFAS or PFAS entry into water through biosolids application. So biosolids are these solids from wastewater treatment, and the PFAS enter in the water, in the wastewater, and then are enter into the biosolids that are land applied. So do you think that you could use your model to simulate that entry from land applied biosolids?
You're talking about you're asking about Cropwat, right?
Yes.
Well, so that I think would fall better under gray water, just because Cropwat looks at, irrigation and crop water requirements to have a crop grow successfully and develop successfully. So, but I think that the gray could definitely be applied to any pollutant. Just what I showed today is just, just what's the big ones like nitrogen and phosphorus that are pretty specific to agriculture. Well, not just agriculture, but are a big problem with agriculture.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, everybody. It's nice to see you, Robyn. It was an excellent job. And nice to not quite see everybody, but nice to see your names. And just a couple quick comments about Noel's questions that in just about every year in the last 70 years or so, all of the surface water has been used. So the demand is always almost always 100% for the surface water, and then groundwater is used to make up the rest of the demand during excuse me, many years, and especially during drought years. And then there are almost no flows released specifically for ecological uses so far, but we're trying to change that here.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for the questions. And Alex, sorry for the confusion. We have had some issues with Zoom bombing in the past, and so we have everybody on mute unless you request to speak. So that's what was going on, and just for future, if you join in on our seminars. But thank you, everybody, for attending, and thanks especially to our presenters, Karleigh and Robyn. This is really a super important part of the graduate experience. Sharing your bit about your research with and some of the challenges with all of us is really useful, and we all really enjoy hearing about the work that you all are doing. So thanks again for making the time, and especially for doing it on somewhat short notice. So again, next week we will be hearing from Dr. Bruce Rittman, and I hope to see all of you again next week. Have a great week, everyone.